What is up? This is Felipe. Welcome to Second Earth Alternative. So yes, it's been a while. Well, technically it's only been a couple weeks since my last updates regarding the film, but all in all, I just want to say that everything is going really well. And it just seems like things are going according to plans. We've had some nice breaks, and I do think that this film might actually be a little bit better than we initially planned. So fingers crossed, let's hope that everything goes well. Today I want to talk about pyramids, humanity, and the moon. I know, it's not exactly water cooler topics, but there is a common thread with all three that I think ties neatly with the concept of E.T. aliens. In addition, I ran into some information that calls back to one of the earlier episodes and may introduce a plausible hypothesis as to what the conditions were that was necessary for the functionality of the pyramids, or at least some pyramids. Okay, so I'm going to turn up some epic music because this topic deserves it. So here it is. We're here on a tiny pale blue dot in this vast cold abyss we call space. There is so much around us and yet so much space between the things that truly matter, the things that make a difference in our lives. For example, the nucleus of an atom compared to the outside of the spinning electrons is analogous to a tiny little marble in the middle of a giant stadium like the Rose Bowl. I mean, you have a ton of space in between. Now, the same can be said about the planets and the stars. Just a lot of space with nothing in between, or just random comments. And if you were to take an image of the mega structure that makes up all the stars and all the galaxies that we can see in the universe, well, it would look something like this. Now, the only other time that I have ever seen this pattern is when I was looking at mapped neurons of brain cells, or the virtual nodes of basically social media engagement. And yes, I'm gonna admit it that there's something very strange that the very stars that we inhabit actually takes on a pattern that we usually associate with intelligence. Could there be a greater force at play, a greater brain, so to speak? Now, I don't know why I'm alive. I don't know what it means to be alive. And many scientists have attempted to solve these seemingly impossible questions by reducing information to its infinitesimal scale, its most basic building blocks. Reductionism. It's a great tool to understand the intricacies of how the laws of physics interact with one another, or with each other, I should say. However, it does nothing to truly answer the questions of what are we doing here? What is the meaning of all of this? Meaning and purpose cannot be reduced to simpler building blocks. It's comprised of an aggregation of systems. Systems which otherwise in their singular form would have no purpose, other than just the simple functionality of itself. Understanding the mortar that glues a building together does little to help understand the true beauty of the complete structure or the true purpose of a Gothic church, for example. I see person as a microcosm of the universe, just as a bacteria might be the microcosm of a person. If I were to try to define the world in purpose-based concepts, a type of outlook, I would ask a simple question like, what is the purpose of making a universe full of organisms, but that are all confined to their own individual spheres? What is the ultimate purpose of humanity if only confined to their very planets? Never capable of visiting another star, yet every starry night we're able to see their presence. Does it make sense that we forever in our evolution of species would be isolated, all the while capable of imagining incredible and seemingly impossible concepts while gazing at the night sky? Seeing the other stars that litter our skies only as a ghost reminder, not an actuality that can be strived for in the future, just seems a little bit empty. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of purpose to that. Another way of thinking about this is, what would be the purpose of making a video game with millions of characters, but a game to which none of the characters can actually interact with one another? Now, I don't pretend to know why we're alive. I just have an easier time believing that perhaps the world was made to be more purposeful than not, more capable of creating further modes of expressions, teachings, deeper forms of sympathy and understanding for a species that might be so difficult to understand. Physicists will tell you it's impossible to travel to another star in a short enough time for space travel to be an actual viable possibility. They say that nothing can move faster than the speed of light. But that's not necessarily true. You see, space itself can travel faster than the speed of light. Since the Big Bang, space has been expanding much faster than the speed of light would have otherwise allowed within its own limitations. And traveling from point A to point B does not necessarily have to travel through space. We can, for example, have space bend around us and travel around us instead. And this, in effect, could cause you to move vast distances in a much shorter time period. I guess the traditional example would be a wormhole. But even if we could bend space, the amount of energy required would be just too much for us to harness, fires back the skeptical physicists. But look how much energy is in a nuclear weapon. The power that allows the explosion is just a simple separation of atoms via a fission process. And nuclear weapons don't have to be that large for an explosion to occur that would demolish something that perhaps is 1 trillion times bigger than the actual bomb itself. You see, the point is the energy needed is already there. It's just our ability to not harness it that is the problem. The energy is literally embedded in the particles themselves, the very fabric of space-time itself. And let's not forget that a nuclear explosion is not the totality of how deep these fission science can go. What if scientists were to discover how to split quarks, for example? Will science one day be able to create antimatter that is thermodynamically isolated in some, electromagnetic field or some kind of plasma field? From my tangential understanding of physics, I don't see anything within the laws of physics themselves that truly negates the true possibility of interstellar travel. In my perspective, and yes, I'm not an expert, but I do believe that these are mostly engineering obstacles, like how to contain antimatter, how do we block radiation from a spacecraft to keep astronauts alive in deep space or in the radiation-emitting Jupiter. It's not a simple solution, but the question of what type of technology will be able to bend space in a manner that can be practical for a craft to utilize is not that far beyond our understanding of our physics. In fact, I would say it's well within the understanding of our physics. Like I said, it's just a matter of finding ways to harness these energies, finding ways to bend space. What I'm trying to say is the energy is there. The ability to bend space is there. So why are all these physicists saying, well, this is it, we're never going to be able to space travel? It just doesn't make sense to me. So now we get to the topic of the moon. So before I proceed, let me just share a few quotes about the qualities of the moon that some people may not be completely aware of. Take a look. So the moon seems to be an odd occurrence, a statistical anomaly. But you see, like I said before, I don't know what the true purpose of life is, but what I see all around us are coincidences that seemingly allows us to live our lives more purposeful than otherwise. As far as we know, there's only one intelligent species in the solar system. So what are the chances that this species would not only have exactly one moon, but that this moon would be the exact same size as the sun from our visual perspective? Of course, the moon gets closer and farther from Earth periodically, but its average distance actually makes it almost exactly the same size as the sun. It's such a strange coincidence, given the concept that we have 12-hour nights, exactly 12-hour days, a perfect duality, a cool moon that represents the polar opposite of a fiery sun, both which are exactly the same size, almost like a yin and yang. The Mayans, for example, use this periodic crossing of the true planetoid spheres, meaning the lunar eclipses, as a reference point for the concept of time. Now, time is relative to the mechanisms of a clock, so their means of measuring time used for the periodic crossing of our solar system as a building block to build their calendars around. It's like a cosmic clock that is built around our solar system, a clock that we humans inherited. But listen carefully to the exact words I'm using. A clock that is built into our solar system. Now, clocks by definition are intelligently created. Built by the definition is something that is constructed by something or someone that has intelligence. So even if eclipses were used as a cosmic reference because it's just the only periodic mechanism we have in our skies, we still have to consider the unbelievable coincidence that the sun and the moon are the exact same size, creating a spectacular astronomical show that even has stopped wars in the past. Now, I'm not being facetious. 2,600 years ago, a total solar eclipse stopped a battle of what is now modern-day Turkey between the Medes and the Lydians. The sheer spectacular nature of a full solar eclipse was like a sign from God to these people. And maybe they're right. Maybe it is a sign of God, but not so much a present decision that God is making, rather a construction that was purposely placed by a God-like entity, a God-like sentience, perhaps billions of years ago, to allow life to prosper on this planet. The moon is moving away from us by inches every year, so it's presumed that it used to be, I don't know, like 20 times closer to us when it was formed. At the same time, the mysteries of the moon have yet to be solved. And in my opinion, it is well within the limits of possibility to assume that high-level intelligence, perhaps some ancient aliens billions of years ago, actually placed the moon where it is to tidally lock the moon into place, or allow the moon to, in such a manner that it would be tidally locked, so as to allow evolution, and that, I don't know, maybe they knew that evolution would take a path where eventually humans would be around at this point where the moon is looking at the exact same size as the sun. Going back to the Fermi paradox, I want to ask again, so where are they? Where are the aliens? The idea that E.T. aliens are real, in my opinion, is not that controversial. Even the most hard-headed skeptic is willing to admit that intelligent life probably occurs in other planets. Their skepticism occurs from the idea that the aliens may not have the means to come to other planets, meaning they're not interstellar travelers. Well, if ET aliens exist, but we don't see them, there's only a few possibilities as to what this means. One, they can't reach us, and the skeptics are just right. I mean, it's just that we're too far away from another star. Two, they can reach us, but they choose not to visit us. Now, in my opinion, of course this is possible, but given the probability that if there are aliens, there would be so many other aliens, it just seems unlikely that no species at all would want to visit us. Three, they come in secrecy, meaning their modus operandi is that of stealth. Okay, given this third possibility of not wanting to be seen, given that this is natural behavior that we humans ourselves perform when we're initially studying other animals in a naturalistic way, well, that gives me ample reasons to believe that this scenario is very possible. Imagine a boat capturing a female dolphin to help monitor her health issues, and then they release her, possibly they tag her. What would that dolphin communicate to her peers as to what happened? What, is she going to say that something from beyond the waters just captured her, tagged her, put these bright lights on her, and then released her at the exact same spot that she was captured? With the dolphins, if she could communicate this, would they believe her, really? Now, this issue with the third possibility is that if they can come here, then surely they have the means to keep themselves in disguise or camouflage. And it becomes a seemingly unprovable assertion, like saying that God is real, but I can't prove it because God is invisible. Well, I don't think that's quite the case. You see, there are people who have come in contact with these beings, or so they claim. They're called alien abductees, or experiencers, if you prefer that term. And their descriptions, I have to say, are eerily familiar to the aforementioned dolphin analogy. And this comes to my next point, the pyramids. Why haven't the indigenous tribes of the Amazon showed any signs of evolving to the likes of the Mayans or the Aztecs, who were actually building pyramids? Maybe because humanity is unable to do so without some kind of push? That's the hypothesis that I'm going with. You see, if humans were so technologically inclined to leap out of the indigenous earthbound ways, why is it that humanity stayed mostly the same for over 260,000 years, but only in the last 12,000 to 5,000 years discovered a means to build megalithic structures in not just one sector of the world, but worldwide in many disparate cultures? This was happening even if the cultures had no means to communicate with one another. Now, I can assume a number of different reasons to explain such a discrepancy, but I'm not really assuming like a skeptic might think I would. You see, more so than assuming, I'm actually just listening in. When you see, for example, a stone structure that weighs over 1,000 tons, and to this day nobody can explain how this was even lifted, I can think of only two things. For 95% of our history, we lived in jungles, but somehow, out of nowhere, for no explainable reason, we suddenly arose from a simplistic way of living to lifting megalithic structures like this 1,000 trilithon found in Baalbek, Lebanon that would today require 67 modern cranes to lift. They don't even know how they could lift it nowadays. Now that's a hell of a strong assumption to make. And believe me, I'm not ignoring the exponential nature of technological growth. I'm simply pointing out the archaeological mystery that most of the great cultures that have made these megalithic structures, they just seem to sprout out of nowhere, making the best buildings, the best structures, the best pyramids at that exact time, and only afterwards, only thousands of years afterwards, do their capabilities steadily decline. This is a true phenomenon. Archaeologists have no idea why this is happening. But if humanity was taught by some higher intelligence, and that higher intelligence eventually left, this idea would completely make sense. Now, one classic example would be the Pyramid of Giza, which denotes the pi value in its construction 10 times more accurately than the pi value that is given by the Egyptian mathematical document, the Rhind Papyrus, which was written 1,000 years later. I mean, that is if we go by the traditional dating of the pyramids, meaning during Pharaoh Khufu's time. Also, the Pyramid of Giza could be much older. There's no good evidence to believe that the Pyramid of Giza was built by Pharaoh Khufu other than some inscription inside the pyramid, which would be analogous to some future civilization excavating our society and finding spray painting graffiti on the wall and then claiming that the wall belongs to the person who sprayed the graffiti. The truth is, the Great Pyramid of Giza has no hieroglyphs. There's no pyramid making plans that were ever discovered from Khufu himself, or anyone for that matter. There are places inside the pyramid that was constructed with no lights. They weren't using fire to light the pyramid during its construction. Now, Professor Dr. Robert Schoch of Boston University has demonstrated that the Sphinx has to be over 10,000 years old due to the weather erosion patterns that can be seen around the structure itself. It's very plausible that the pyramid could be just as old as the Sphinx. And even if I were to believe Pharaoh Khufu built the pyramids, I would also have to assume that an SUV-sized block was lifted and placed in position every minute for 24 hours a day without stopping for decades and decades at a time. And I'm talking about like doing it at nighttime too, if it could be built within Khufu's reign. It's not only hard to make that assumption, but the idea that they made this pinpoint accuracy and some of these blocks were taken up 40 stories. Some of these blocks were granite, perfectly cut blocks that weighed over 60 to 80 tons, and I'm supposed to believe that somehow this pyramid could have just magically been made with over 2,300,000 blocks. Ladies and gentlemen, come on, let's just take a deep breath and really think about what all of that means. And that's just one pyramid. That's just one pyramid. For God's sakes, we don't even know what the function of the pyramid is. It's the most difficult, apparently the most difficult megastructure that has ever been built outside of perhaps like the trilithons that you see at Baalbek, and somehow we don't know what the pyramids are made for? Does that make sense to anybody? Okay, let me make this really simple. The only tools discovered were made out of copper. The king's chamber was made out of granite. Granite is way, way, way more dense, way more hard is in a hard material than copper. So it's basically impossible to carve granite with the tools that they're claiming the Egyptians had during that time. So ask again, why are the Amazonian indigenous people doing this? Why are they building pyramids? I'm not guessing here. I'm simply reiterating what these ancient cultures are saying. These megalithic structures were made for the gods. or by the gods themselves. If you study the Dogon culture, for example, the West African tribe that is not only as old as the Sumerians, but actually had metallurgical and mathematical knowledge, well, they claim that it wasn't them. That's simple. They say that their knowledge was inherited or given to them by these beings that had come from the Sirius star system. And this included foods that they said was poisonous or not poisonous. It's not a knowledge that they went and ate and then one person died and they're like, okay, let's take notes. This food is poisonous. No, they're claiming that beings from the Sirius star system gave them mathematical, metallurgical, and knowledge about what to farm, what to eat. Just very practical knowledge that is required to build a civilization. Now, this was recorded by French anthropologists in the 1920s, so the Dogon people specifically described these beings as coming from one of the 3 stars that are orbiting the Sirius star system. Now, these are jaw-dropping concepts that can be analyzed from this information. One, a highly capable culture does not want to credit themselves for what many anthropologists would assume would be some great cultural accomplishments. 2, the Sirius star system is also coincidentally worshipped by the Egyptians and other cultures around the world, including Göbekli Tepe possibly. I mean, I get it, it's one of the brightest stars in our skies, but that's part of what makes this claim even more wondrous. Because of the sheer brightness of Sirius, it happens to not only be one of the closest stars to our systems, which means it makes it a more likely candidate for interstellar travel, it's also way too luminous for scientists to notice the other stars. It's impossible to see that there are other stars around the Sirius A with only telescopes. It wasn't until 1995 that a former scientist from NASA published in the prestigious astronomy journal that due to solar perturbation, as analyzed by computer-simulated mathematical models, the Sirius system was likely a trinary system, meaning a 3-star system. So if it requires computer mathematical models to denote this fact, how in the world did the Dogon people know that Sirius is a trinary system long before any computer had even been invented? We're talking about like half a century before any computers were invented. A lot of mysterious megalithic structure was not only astronomical in nature, as above, so below, as the ancient saying goes, it's also that these structures were built in reference to the sky gods. The Sumerians called these gods Anunnaki, which translates those who from the heavens descended to earth. Now, I don't think it's coincidence that the Hopi people who claim to have survived catastrophe because these ant people or ant friends had built shelters for them, it's not coincidence that they just happen to have the word Anu, which means ants, and Naki, which means friend, meaning ant friend literally translates to Anunnaki. I don't think it's a coincidence. The Sumerians called their creator god Namu or Nama, depending on the sex, and the Dogon people that we just talked about, the West African tribe, called their creator gods Nomos. The etymology of language can actually say a lot, especially if the words or concepts were universally shared throughout the world. But my big point is fairly simple. Zahi Hawass, former Supreme Council of Antiquities, might actually call me a pyramidiot for saying this, but the idea that ET aliens or sky gods are associated with the buildings of the megalithic structures is not an assumption. It is the interpreted words of these cultures. The cultures themselves are saying that the gods built them. Just like the Hopi Indians, the oldest known culturally practiced religion is Zoroastrianism. Now, there are strange underground structures, entire cities capable of housing tens of thousands of people under the surface of Cappadocia, Turkey. These cities, which were made of soft limestone, have never caved in. But this seems to be almost an engineering, like impossible feats, at least for people of that age. Like, engineers and archaeologists are absolutely stunned as to how these cities were built. But once again, I'm not assuming it was built by E.T.s. I'm simply going off the words of the culture themselves. See, in Zoroastric text, it says very specifically that underground cities were built on the orders of their god, Ahura Mazda, who happened to look like this, to protect the people from a long winter. This is exactly what the Hopi Indians said when they mentioned that their ant people had built underground shelters for the Hopi Indians to survive a fire from the sky in a long winter, likely in reference to the Younger Dryas and the comet that hit Greenland around the same time. Look at the Waginas, which are these gods who came from a place that their Aborigines termed Dream Time. Now look at the petroglyphs of the ant people. look at the dolls that are created by the Vinca Indo-European people over 8,000 years ago. And one of my favorites is this figurine from the Sumerian gods. What I love about these alien-looking depictions is that they are some of the oldest representations that we have for these gods, or that they have for these gods, not the modern ones. So you see, the Babylonians made the goddess Ishtar also female, also termed Inanna, like this. But the older version, the one that's around 4,500 BC, as opposed to 2,500 BC, well, it looked like this. See, the older versions always look more alien, more extraterrestrial, in the sense of how modern alien abductees describe their experiences. How interesting that we have a group of people who claim to have been in contact with aliens, and their depictions of these large heads, these giant eyes, and even reptilians just happen to match the oldest gods that are represented by our cultures. And not just that, but that these megalithic structures are associated with these gods. For example, Baalbek, the city of Baalbek that I was just showing the trilithons, well, Baal is the name of their god. The Quetzalcoatl pyramid. Quetzalcoatl is the god of the ancient Aztecs that literally translates to feathered serpents. The city of Ur in Iraq, where they found these reptilian-looking dolls. The city of Ur is the city of gods. It's a city where the gods apparently inhabited. And if you want to know why the ancient cultures stopped depicting gods like this, well, it's actually written in the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not make thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. A commandment that was created around 2500 BC, precisely when the alien statues suddenly took a more human form. Water under the earth. So weird that the US Navy have not only admitted that UFOs are real, but that some supposedly are coming from under our ocean. A long time ago, I made an episode about the little-known Chinese pyramids. It's 21 to be exact. That's how many pyramids I found in one afternoon on Google Earth. In that episode, I made a perception, a concept I never actually knew before until I analyzed these pyramids. So if you never saw the episode, take a look at what was said. If you do the measurements of this pyramid, it actually has a base that's greater than the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Here is another pyramid in China. So the pattern is, guys, if you haven't noticed, these pyramids are lining up, guys. Look, it creates a single line. So for example, I discovered that in China, these pyramids seemingly line up in a linear way. Now, upon closer examination, I was startled to see that there was a river that ran across the path of these pyramids, just like in Egypt. Does this imply that the presence of water is necessary for the functionality of the pyramid?
Which reminds me that I should point out another lesser-known detail, which is that the Nile River was once 8 miles closer to the Giza Plateau, putting it nearly right up to the pyramids themselves. This whole area, which is now city, was once the bottom of the Nile River, and the cliff-like formation that makes up the plateau was the river's shoreline. Pretty interesting, as it further paints us a picture of just how much this area has changed from what it was thousands of years ago when the ancient empire was thriving.
Once again, I ask, coincidence? I guess you're beginning to understand that I'm not a big believer in coincidences. I don't pretend to know how or exactly why the pyramids around the world were built. I'm simply relaying the idea that maybe water was necessary for its functionality. For those who think that water was used to transport the blocks, that's absolute nonsense. None of the Egyptian boats that have ever been discovered had the capability of carrying multi-ton blocks without capsizing. Now, if you doubt this claim, I actually highly recommend you watch the full episode of Bright Insight. Jimmy does an excellent job of explaining why it's so unlikely to assume that boats could actually have carried such loads. Thank you so much for listening in. I'm going to be coming out with a new episode soon, listing the top 10 reasons why the Egyptian pyramids is stranger than many skeptics believe. Man, it's so great to be engaged again with this channel. Don't forget to like the video, well, that is, if you liked it, and share this episode to your peers. Please leave a comment if you like. It's always nice to be engaged with the Second Earth community. This is Felipe speaking, signing out.